I'm here today with Jake Stauch. He is the CEO and founder of Serval. Serval has reached $1 billion valuation in less than 2 years, and it is a security and IT service management company. I'm very happy to be here in San Francisco at their brand new headquarters. Jake.
So great to be here. Thank you so much, Nick.
We were introduced by Risha Mehta of Radical Ventures, who invested in your Series B. And Risha reached out cold while I was the CISO of data and AI at IBM and said, would you speak to this founder that I'm considering investing on behalf of Radical Ventures into for their Series B? And I said, yeah, I would love to. I'd love to, as a former founder, speak with other founders and see if I can give some kind of assistance or insight. And when we talked, you gave me the best demo of anything that I had ever seen. And incidentally, I was like, at the time, who else is on the sales team? And Jake's like, I am the sales team and one other guy. And I was like, this is incredible. Where are you today? And where were you?
I was in Denver. I was near you.
You were near me.
I was at an IT conference, the Jamf user conference. And so we happened to be in the same place, coincidentally.
That's right. And I go, what are you doing later on? And you were like, we'll have like a client dinner. And I was like, no. What are you doing later on, like between now and the dinner? And what did you say?
Nothing. Let's get dinner. Yeah.
Let's get together. So 2 bourbons later, both of them were mine. Jake didn't drink any. I got to learn what Serval really was. And when I looked into it, it was very clear to me that it was a state change in the way that software would work. Because when I looked at the features and the functions that were associated with it, it wasn't like something I could look at even 5 years ago in that it's like, here's a feature and function list. It's like, here are all the things that are possible that it could do, but doesn't necessarily need to. And so I think what I'd like to do is start by talking a little bit about your background with a security company, which is Verkada, and how that informed your decision to create your own security and ITSM company in Serval.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent 5 years at Verkada. That was a great time period. I got to ride this rocket ship, joined when they were around 100 employees, stayed with them past 2,000 employees, and so saw a lot of growth there. And Verkada built security cameras initially, and then access control systems, alarm systems, basically physical security for buildings. And all the software platforms that went with that. And I was director of product. I was largely responsible for new products. So I was working on building new products, working closely with IT and security teams, basically doing customer discovery for 5 years, talking to these teams and saying, what do you want us to build for you next? And that process, you just get to understand their pain points really, really well. And even though I was focused on these physical devices and the software that went with them, cameras and alarm systems and things like that, we heard about all the other pain points too. And so they'd bring up, I really want to get out of these help desk requests. I really want to, resolve all these requests that are coming in. And I want to get out of the toil, the manual effort required to approve access and review access and troubleshoot all these issues. And then I'd have to steer the conversation. I would have to say, well, okay, but what about, environmental sensors? What about panic buttons? Like, let's talk about something that I can help you with. But that experience was really informative of, wow, there's a lot of pain points. And I think the high level thing was they're not automating anything. And that was really bizarre to me because there are allegedly all these tools for security automation and IT automation. We hear about these startups all the time. And so living in Silicon Valley and hearing about all these automation tools and then being on the ground with these large IT organizations and security organizations and seeing automation coverage basically zero, it was such a disconnect. And it took a while for me to understand what was going on there. And eventually those insights led to creating Serval of, well, if we can actually make automation easier, then we can solve all these related challenges in IT and security.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about the tool sprawl a little bit later. As a CISO, it is a real problem, right? I mean, this town, being San Francisco, runs on a quarterly basis, as does New York City. And so a lot of the sales teams will be like, look, you need this functionality and you need it today. And sometimes as a CISO, you're like, you're right. I totally do need that. But the fact of the matter is that unless you have like an orchestration layer, or you have some ability to massively hire quickly the skill set in order to administrate that, you have now purchased a tool that you can't immediately deploy. And so when I, as a sitting CISO, reviewed Serval, I was like, this is the way for me to be able to immediately deploy all of the stuff I've already bought.
Yeah. No, exactly. It was funny. One of the early insights when me and my co-founder were doing customer interviews was, wow, the capabilities of the software that these people have purchased has outstripped their ability to implement those capabilities. And so all these folks are sitting on tools that could do a lot more, and they're not. And so you don't want to really sell them one more tool to add to their toolkit that they can't take advantage of. You actually want to sell them something that allows them to take advantage of all the capabilities that the applications are already implementing, already purchased.
It's okay. So here was my unlock moment, right? Is that I looked at it and I was like, let me go ahead and see what security features that Serval has. And then I was like, wait a minute. There's no security features other than like security of the cloud, which you're handling along with the cloud provider, AWS in this case. Security in the cloud. So you've got organization, you've got, roles for Serval itself. And so like, that's all table stakes. The security functionality of Serval is imbued in the decisions that a CISO has already made with regard to what else to buy to support the enterprise. So effectively, all of the good decisions that have compounded over the course of the last several years or quarters come to fore and are able to be surfaced through the orchestration layer that is Serval. The orchestration of all of the existing security products is in fact the killer feature that they have from a security perspective.
Yeah, the ability to describe in Serval what it is you want to do and have that implemented, but it's implemented on top of your existing applications. It's using the authorization that you've granted to Serval from those applications, using the role-based access control you have set up. And so we empower CISOs and IT leaders to really deploy this in a very safe and secure way. We think about this in a few different ways. One is allowing control at multiple different levels of the platform. So for example, when you connect an application in Serval, an app integration, and you provide those integration credentials, the API keys, you control the scopes of that API token and what you're allowing Serval to do when you provide that. And that app integration can actually be different for different teams. That's a very unique approach. So a lot of times application integrations for vendors like us are shared across all the different teams. But we say, no, if you connect Google Workspace or Okta to one team with certain scopes and you connect it to another team, you can have different scopes for different teams. So that is really, really powerful, so that the security team, when they're building automations, they can be more powerful than the automations that the IT team builds or the HR team builds. And that's one layer. On top, you've got the role-based access control on who belongs to which teams, what they can do in the teams. And then when you build these workflows and these automations, you can have these additional layers of control, permissions on who can run the workflow, who can publish the workflow, who has to approve the workflow. And then you're also controlling the workflow logic itself, which can have additional checks like, hey, if you detect that a security team member is running this, don't allow it or escalate for approval. And so, we think about this very much in like layers of control and layers of protection. And as you said, sitting on top of an existing infrastructure that has a lot of these controls in place.
So I'd like to touch on that and actually go one level deeper. And the reason why is that role-based access control is fantastic. Also table stakes for 2026. Attribute-based access control is the new hotness. And a lot of the security integrations that Serval has prioritized and can say in January 2026 are already in play are at an attribute-based access control level. And if you're able to describe what you're looking for in natural language, just same as you would with ChatGPT, like, hey, make sure that anyone that has this attribute is able to do this function, you now also have attribute-based access control, specifically through Serval as the orchestration plane.
Yeah, exactly. The way our engine works, our workflow system works, is that you can describe anything you're looking to automate, anything you're looking to run a report on in natural language. And as long as the APIs exist, you can pull any set of information from any API. So as long as these attributes exist, you can pull that information and then you can run any set of actions using that workflow engine. So this flexible system of using AI to build code and then run that code allows you to be really creative with how you build these policies, these procedures, these workflows.
And so if I was listening to the podcast, I would think, okay, as long as the API exists, and that would be the thing that I would hang on and I would be like, well, let me think about this later. The fact of the matter is, Jake, you've got 54 integrations already. And for each one of those integrations, you have X number of standardized workflows. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 22. And you also have the ability to create a custom integration as long as there's an OAuth interface. Is that right?
OAuth or API key. There has to be some kind of standard mechanism for authentication.
Is it immediately evident to your customer base or prospects that they have the ability to create their own custom integration that may not be one of the 54 that you have already, that they're like, oh my God, this is going to make my life so much easier?
It's not obvious how easy it is. It's obvious that we have that because we tell them we have that, but every other vendor has a way to build a custom integration. But usually what that means is your engineering team is going to do a whole lot of work to get that actually functional working. It's probably never going to work the way you want it to. And so when we say custom integration, a lot of people get, they're a little afraid of what that means, because in every other case, that's been a lot of work. For us, custom integration is as simple as give us the domain of the software application, give us the OAuth credentials, give us the API key, give us the scopes if you can scope that token, and you're done. And as long as we have the API credentials, our workflow builder can actually find the API spec, build workflows for that application against an API out of the box without any other effort required. So when we say custom integration, we mean that you're up and running in seconds, not going through some development process to build a custom integration.
So it sounds like science fiction. I know it's not because I've seen it work, but can you tell me about the first time that one of your customers put together a custom integration and it did the thing that they wanted it to do, and they were like, wow, this is incredible?
Yeah, it happened early on where customers would just connect things. And I don't remember exactly what the first one was because they do it all the time. And they would just bring it to us. They would just show us like, yeah, you didn't have a connector for this, so we added it and it worked. And that just shocked us because we thought customers would need a lot of hand-holding with that. An early version was, I know customers built custom connectors to Jamf. We had Kanji support, but we didn't have the Jamf MDM support. And they just built it and it just worked. I know Adobe, before we had that as a native integration, a customer just one-shotted their Adobe integration. They just connected the application credentials and just said, okay, I want to automate this thing in Adobe, and it just worked. And so I think it always surprises customers just how well and reliable that works. My biggest challenge, not just in this, but across the platform, is convincing people that it's not science fiction, convincing people that this is real and it's easy. All the hesitation from prospects when they see this platform is, okay, what are you not telling me? How are you hiding the ball? How is this hand wavy can demo? And so a lot of what we do is try to poke through that skepticism and just say, try us, don't trust us, try it. And you'll see that I'm not lying here when I'm telling the truth about what this platform does and how it works.
Here's the reason why I think that argument works. And it has to do with velocity. Let's talk about Mercor. So Mercor is another San Francisco startup, less than 3 years old, $10 billion valuation. and they have 30,000 contractors. Now, let me do everyone a solid and put that in context, which is that the average Fortune 1000 company has got 37,000 employees. The largest of the Fortune 1000 companies might have a couple 100,000. And then the smallest of the Fortune 1000 companies might have dozens of employees. But the average, by and large, is 37,000. However, the 75th percentile of the Fortune 1000 companies actually are about 30,000. So Mercor is the same size as your average Fortune 1000 company. When Mercor came to Serval and they said, we have this massive scale problem, and the CISO's hair was on fire, basically saying, we need to find a way to repeatedly and accurately onboard these contractors in a way that enables them to accomplish their role, but also collapses their ability to cause any kind of damage inside of the enterprise. How do we do this properly? What did you say?
They didn't even bring that to us. We started working with them, and we were just connecting a couple hundred employees of their core employee base, not their contractors. And then they just started using it for 30,000 contractors without telling us, and the platform just worked. The cool thing about that whole experience is that we've seen customers scale us in ways that we didn't anticipate and didn't know about, without us having to say, oh, we've got to prepare for this. We've got to sit down with you. We've got to go on site. We've got to figure out how we're going to get this to work. That happened in the background without them even talking to us. We were just engaging with their IT team and solving some basic password resets, they didn't even have a ticketing system in place when we started working with them. We were just doing basic IT ticketing. And they're like, oh, wow, we can just use this to onboard 30,000 people through this platform.
Wow. That's the science fiction we're talking about,
yeah.
Right?
The only reason we found out that this was happening is they actually pulled up their platform and they clicked into a dropdown, and they said this dropdown just takes forever to load. And we're trying to figure out, why does this dropdown take forever to load? And realized because we're loading 30,000 users in this dropdown of people that you could assign this ticket to. So we had to rethink a little bit of our assumptions there, because we didn't realize that this is how they were using it so quickly. But that was really cool that there basically nothing that broke other than a few core things of maybe don't load 30,000 items in this dropdown.
Sure. The way that I heard it is that the head of IT at Mercor said, we onboarded 30,000 contractors in minutes. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it takes practically zero time, because Serval just automates it for them. And it was very easy for them to build the onboarding workflow. And then once it's built, it's just automatic. What Mercor has been able to do with 30,000 contractors is incredible from a hiring story. But what's really impressive is the access story of how do you get those people into the platform and have the appropriate level of access.
Yeah, I mean, that's usually a case-by-case basis, and your software has been able to figure out what the profile looks like for any given contractor and do it automatically.
Absolutely.
So Jake, if you think about the fact that the average Fortune 1000 company is 56 years old and has 37,000 employees, and there's this little company in San Francisco that's 3 years old and has 30,000 contractors plus a few hundred employees, and onboarded all those folks in minutes, that's when science fiction becomes reality.
Yeah. Even though we started with some of these fast-growing AI companies, we proved very early on that we can scale to some of the largest organizations in the world.
Now, I was super impressed with the demo that you gave, but one of your other customers had a much better soundbite than what I could ever give, which is that our brains were on the wall. Their mind was blown. Tell me what you showed them that got them to that place.
It was actually Cribble, one of our great favorite customers, that saw a demo of the product. They said, after this demo, we have to go scrape our brains off the wall. And what was crazy is that what we showed them was not even the deepest, most impressive part of the product. It was something that we thought of as pretty table stakes, which is sending a message into our request system through Slack, auto-generating a ServiceNow ticket, populating all these fields, but we set that up in seconds, which in retrospect is pretty cool, all the things that had to come together to make that possible. And I think what we've seen consistently is we can show people a workflow that gets done in seconds that they may have worked on for weeks or months, maybe 6 months, and we just show it done instantly. And that's what really blows people's minds, because they understand the problem. They understand the complexity of what we just showed them and how hard it is to do and how easy we made it. And so this was really, really cool, because we didn't even think that that was a cool part of the platform. When we heard that, we thought, you haven't seen anything yet. Like that's the basics. That's the table stakes. Of course we can generate these tickets and populate these fields and do all this cool stuff. But we take for granted sometimes how cool the table stakes of our product is. And we can show that in a demo, but then we can say, hey, do you want to take it a step further? Do you want to reset passwords, or, God forbid, actually give somebody access to an application? Like, things that also we think of as table stakes are just so difficult to do in traditional automation systems that require this dragging and dropping and configuration, and just like these old school workflow builders make it so difficult and high friction. In many cases, you're having to build custom scripts. Imagine you're sitting in their shoes and you're the one that has been building that automation, right? You've been clicking around, you've been dragging, you've been dropping, you've been writing some kind of custom connector and script, and you've been toiling in the darkness for months and months and months to get something that kind of sort of works, but is kind of glued together. And then somebody comes along with a demo and shows that this is just done instantly. That's what blew their minds. That's why they said, wow, we had to scrape our brains off the floor after this first call.
When an enterprise sees Serval working and they understand that the science fiction is actual reality, how do they take that as efficiency instead of job replacement for the humans that are on their teams that they care about?
Yeah, so one of the things that surprised us, honestly, is we're not seeing job displacement. We're seeing work displacement. There are big parts of the job, the work that's actually being done, that are getting displaced, but the jobs are not going away. Because similar to software engineering, it turns out there's a giant backlog of IT and security work that these companies always wanted to get done, and they never were able to because they didn't have the resources. And so no one is super happy with how their onboarding works, because IT and security teams are busy with other things. No one's really happy about how they've implemented least privilege access controls, because these teams have never been able to prioritize that. And so, yes, we are displacing and automating a lot of work, but then there's this giant backlog that they're able to focus on. And so we enable these IT and security leaders to actually become builders for the organization and build out all these capabilities that they've always wanted to have and have never been able to create, because they're not spending their time on ClickOps and manual work.
So I have to admit that I cheated a little bit. I listened to another podcast that Jake was on, and I think you said in this, and I don't think it's an official Serval tagline, but we enable work that matters, or something along.
Yeah. We get people back to meaningful work.
I got to tell you that as a CISO, you're thinking about all of the work that matters all the time, and you're constantly dealing with onboarding, or you're constantly dealing with identity and access management issues. And these are things that we were promised were going to be automated away by buying this tool or that tool. And it wasn't until I saw Serval at work that I was like, okay, all of the stuff that I already invested in, I can actually make work using this orchestration layer.
Absolutely. One of our first customers was the CISO of Verkada, bringing this into the security team. And they had a full-time person always on call, a security engineer, incredibly talented individual, had to be on call 24/7 to resolve all of the just-in-time access requests and other security issues that would pop up that are all manual effort that could be automated. But that's an actual FTE that was devoted to this 24/7. We made it possible for that person to instantly reprioritize and get back to security engineering and implementing all these really powerful security tools that matter, instead of going in and clicking through these different applications and doing manual work. And I think there's often such a disconnect between the idealized vision of what a job is and what the job ends up looking like. And that gap between what a job should be and what a job is often these things that Serval is automating. And so when Serval gets people back to meaningful work, what we're actually doing here is we're giving you a more idealized version of the job that you actually thought you were getting into. So if you're a software engineer, that means spending more time software engineering. If you're in IT, it means more time actually building the IT infrastructure for the organization and less time doing all this manual work that really can and should be automated. One of the key insights is there's historically just so much friction building these automations, and that is why we don't see as much automation as you could see. And so what Serval's done is we've made it easier to automate something forever than to do it manually once. We've taken all that friction, all those trade-offs and creating automations, deploying automations, and we've removed them. You can automate a task forever faster than doing it manually once.
Deploying AI tools inside of an enterprise has a new level of risk associated with it because you're generating code. How is your engineering team at Serval focused on ensuring that the code that is generated has security first principles in mind for your customers?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I have two thoughts on that. One is if you're using a third-party vendor application, you're using a third-party vendor's code. So there's no getting around it. At the end of the day, it's all code under the hood. So yes, we allow customers to generate code on the fly, but regardless of what tools they're using, if it's an AI vendor and that's another tool, they're using somebody else's code and they're trusting that that's going to run. One of the core differences of Serval is that we show you the code that's going to run. We let you see it, edit it, audit it, get the inputs and outputs of every single API call. And so we think we're actually elevating the transparency of these tools versus it being a black box of saying, oh, don't look, we've got an AI agent that's going to do it, and just trust that the AI agent is going to listen to our instructions. So we actually think it is as a more secure approach, even though at first glance, maybe you look at generating code as riskier. I think it's actually more secure because every other application is also generating code and you just can't see it and you don't get to view it and you don't get to audit it. That said, when we do generate the code, we run through many, many different layers to make sure that that code is secure. One is we review the code. So we have AI agents that write the code, or AI agents that review the code to make sure it's doing exactly what the user wants. We scan the code versus the API spec to make sure that it matches the API spec, and we're using the APIs. We do type checking on the code. We then take an LLM and we describe what the code is doing step by step to the user. And so we take the description from the user of what they want the code to do, we generate the code, and then a different step we use to describe that code so that you know exactly what the code that's generated is doing. And that is a really important step there. So when you're reviewing it, even if you're non-technical, you can get a complete understanding of what's been generated. So there's a lot that happens behind the scenes to make sure it's secure, to make sure it's reliable, but to make sure it does what it says it's going to do. But I think fundamentally, the risk is so much less because of that transparency. And then you can test it in your own instance. You can run it against a sandbox environment. When you run it, any kind of errors or issues are going to be fed back into the builder so it can correct the code automatically. So it's a really powerful platform. If you look at what is the alternative is giving an AI agent access to your business systems and hoping that this black box agent behind the scenes is going to do the things you want it to do and not do the things you don't want it to do. Or trust some other company's third-party connectors, which you never get to see. You have no idea how their agent's connecting to Okta, to Entra, to all these platforms. It's all behind the scenes. We expose all of that. And I think that transparency is going to become increasingly important as the capabilities of the agents really outstrip our ability to control and monitor what they're doing.
So I want to slow down here for just a moment because for me, it is the first time that I have heard a company use in production code the Andre Karpathy idea of a committee of models, right? So if you've got one LLM that is generating code and you've got a totally different LLM that is doing an analysis or an audit on the code, you're really looking toward two different code bases within the constraints of the API of your partner organization. So you have some guidelines that are helping the models understand what to develop. You also have some guidelines that help the models understand what to approve. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So We ingest the API spec of these different applications. So when you connect Microsoft, we ingest the Microsoft Graph API. We understand how that API is used. We also have all these examples of workflows that we've created internally, or we've seen created internally. We feed these into the models so that they know how to build workflows. The models also have context on the organization, different tools that are connected, how it can connect to others. The model then uses that context and the user's description of what they want to build a workflow. And then we have a separate agentic step that reviews that workflow to make sure it's doing what the user wants, and all of these checks and balances along the way. It's never a single API call to an LLM, and then we just hope that the output's good and we call it a day. If that were what we were doing, then you could get the same results by just going into ChatGPT and asking ChatGPT to build something for you. There's a lot that makes this a reliable, secure process that is important to our overall workflow. And part of that does come from context from the customer, but it also comes from context from these APIs.
And so, again, from a technical perspective, when you're generating this code, LLMs by nature are probabilistic and generally non-deterministic. But does the context imbued by the API make it more deterministic as opposed to probabilistic?
Absolutely. It's because you're telling it this is what the API says. This is what it looks like when it's done correctly. These are examples in the API docs. It doesn't deviate a lot from that if it doesn't need to. And even though it's always going to be probabilistic, the probabilities really they narrow down and become a very narrow path where it doesn't get to choose a lot of different directions here, because you're saying, hey, here's this context around how this API should be used. Also, if you think about its training data, if you're asking questions about controversial issues or generic topics, there's so much training data that can be conflicting, so that the probabilistic nature of these models can send you in different directions and might lead to hallucinations. There's just not a lot of training data around Microsoft Entra password resets that's going to send you in a crazy direction. And so when you factor that in and you're giving it all this context, you just don't see the kind of hallucinations that most people expect, because they're interacting with these chatbots in more of a question and answer world where the probabilistic nature plays into the hallucinations more so.
Yeah. So when you're saying, what kind of access does the system administrator need? It's not like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle.
Exactly. There's nothing in the training data that's going to make it go in a weird direction.
We've talked a lot about CISOs, Jake, but we haven't talked a lot about CSOs, which basically is a CISO that also has responsibility for physical security of an organization or an enterprise. You have integrations that will actually grant access to physical areas inside of the enterprise too. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. This was obviously influenced by the fact that I worked for a company that handled physical access to buildings, to areas. And we thought it was really important. If you think about access management, we often think about this from a software perspective or an engineering resource perspective, but physical access is really important, and physical access controls are very important. And one of the really cool use cases we came up from the early days is, hey, it'd be really cool if somebody said, hey, I need temporary access to this building. If they could request that via email, via Slack, via phone call, and have that granted automatically or routed for approval and then granted and then revoked at the end of that, and that no one had to be involved in that process other than approvals if you wanted a human in the loop. And so we thought that was really cool. And we actually built that as part of an integration we did with Verkada. And now we've expanded that to other access control companies so that we can automate that physical badge access. I think it's a really cool application. And you can expand this to really other parts of your physical security infrastructure, to your alarm systems, to your camera systems. And what's really neat is, as more and more of physical security infrastructure becomes cloud-based and has really great and robust API support, more and more of these actions can be automated by Serval and tools like it.
Brother, that sounds wild. And here's why. I'm going to put it in context, okay? So when I was Chief Information Security Officer of DataStax before we were purchased by IBM in 2025, one of our very large, some might say the largest banking client on the planet, wanted to come and audit our security practices. And so I, being in charge of security, risk, and compliance, had to host this auditor. Now, that seems like a pretty simple thing, but it's high stakes. And so in order for me to get that done, I personally wanted to white glove and make sure that they had building access. I needed to make sure they had production database access. I needed to make sure that for our enterprise software suite, they had the access necessary to see what they needed to see. But they also needed access to our Google Drive, which seems like it would be an easy thing to do. And I was not in Santa Clara that week, and so I needed to manage this remotely. It was a problem. So that took me interfacing with the help desk, and the help desk then needed to interface with 6 different administrators. I called the head of IT, and I called a bunch of different other folks that were in the security organization, and they made sure to get done what we needed to get done for this very white glove, very custom, very important process for our customer. But with Serval, I theoretically could have just been like, hey, I've got this auditor coming in from this customer. They're super important. I need to make sure that they have access to the building and these 6 different systems. Make it happen.
Absolutely. That's what we do.
Something else that could have been helpful is that when we had a customer that had a production request that required support inside of their trust boundary, we would issue teleport credentials in order to have our production support go in there and basically look at the challenge that the customer was having. Now, the customer was always incredibly interested in how long we were going to have access to what aspects of the data we would have access, what the time to live of that access would be. And again, very white glove, and something that was very high touch, required my personal attention as the chief information security officer. And it happened a lot. And so that's not the work that was moving my company forward. It was the work that was necessary in order to keep my company in place. How would Serval address that to where I didn't need to focus on it and I could have somebody else do it for me?
Yeah, we think about this a lot. So we've got this comprehensive access management system where you can set up access profiles, people that can request access to something, access policies which govern that access request, how long you can request access for something, who has to approve that access, what that procedure looks like. Do you need to provide justification? What justification you need to provide? So you've got the profile on who can request it, the policy on how the request works, but then you've got the provisioning of how do you give somebody that access. And we've got all these different provisioning methods, but one of them is actually using our custom workflow system. So we can say, okay, this request comes in to get this access, and then it goes through the policy to get the right approvals. It can be time bound, so it's set to a certain time interval. And then you customize how that access is provisioned and how it's deprovisioned. And you can use custom workflows to do that. So you could, in Serval, build this custom workflow that grabs these credentials, sends it to this person, and then runs a deprovisioning workflow when that access expires that removes those credentials. That would take you about 30 seconds to build in Serval, and it would work forever.
Jake, I hate to tell you this, but this took me a lot longer than 30 seconds.
Probably did.
So Jake, CISO is Chief Information Security Officer.
Is that what that stands for?
That's what it stands for.
Finally, I know.
Now you know. And CISO is just Chief Security Officer, which includes not just information, but the physical security that you talk with Envoy and Verkada. But it's not really the whole enchilada. Security is really only 1/3 of the responsibility. The other 2/3 are risk and compliance. If you look at it as a whole, it's security, risk, and compliance. We've talked about security at length. We've talked about risk, which is, making sure that the model that is generating the code is as deterministic as possible for a probabilistic model. Let's talk a little bit about compliance. I know, because I have seen your SOC 2 report, that you are SOC 2 compliant. When did you get SOC 2 compliant, and why was that important for Serval?
Yeah, we knew from the beginning that we'd be selling to large enterprises and that we'd be a very small startup selling to very large enterprises. So it was important from the very beginning to kick this off. We started our SOC 2 process on day one. And so we started assembling our evidence and documentation from the very beginning. Even before we were incorporated and set up as a company, we were making sure we had everything organized. And we kicked off our audit period as soon as possible, got SOC 2 immediately. Part of why we kicked off our SOC 2 process so early is because I'm coming from a security organization that was really, really robust, a security organization that actually had a very massive, very public breach in 2021. And I was part of that company when that happened. And I was part of the response to that. Part of the response to that was a SOC 2 program. Now, that was very challenging because at that point, the company was already well over 1,000 employees that had been around for a very long time. Very tough to implement all these policies and procedures and controls at that stage. I knew we wanted to do it early on. I also knew that we were selling to large enterprises from the very beginning, and that was going to be the focus of our business, not selling to the mid-market, not selling to SMBs, but actually focused on large enterprises, especially when dealing with a young early stage company, that we've taken security seriously and compliance seriously from day one. And I think it enforces a lot of discipline in the early days of the company, and is much easier to start in the early days than to try to, backtrack and do it later on.
And you're already dealing with some highly regulated companies and highly regulated industries. You've focused on HIPAA compliance as well. You've got GDPR compliance as well that you've already gone through that motion. What is next from a compliance perspective that you're focused on specifically for large enterprises in regulated industries? Are you thinking more about an ISO 42001 where you're thinking about the AI Act, or are you thinking about an ISO 27001 that's more kind of basic blocking and tackling from an IT perspective? I imagine they're probably both important to you.
Both ISOs are important to us. Those are being kickstarted right now. And also really attainable given the work that we've done on the compliance side. I think what's great is all the controls are in place. A lot of it is the manual effort to get through the documentation and the hard-fought compliance process that makes it a long and difficult journey. But from a company perspective, from a security maturity perspective, we are there. And so it'll be a very smooth transition for us.
I think that you have an appreciation that most founders don't have, which is that you need to begin with the end in mind with regard to compliance. And as an aspect of SOC 2, you are already dealing with GDPR compliance and HIPAA compliance because you're selling into regulated industries. As a result of that, I think that your work that you're doing right now on ISO 27001 and ISO 42001, if it's not already done by the time this podcast airs, which it very well could be, I believe all of that is going to be groundwork for Serval to approach probably the most important enterprise customer on the planet, the United States government.
The United States government has a big budget. We certainly want to go after it. And it's not just the federal government, but it's also vendors that sell into the federal government that a lot of times require the same kind of compliance frameworks. And so FedRAMP is high on our roadmap and something we're working towards right now. What's great is we went through this process at Verkada. A lot of the engineers that actually worked on Verkada's FedRAMP work at Serval today. And so we actually have deep domain expertise. We've gone through this process. We've done it before. We're kicking it off. And that's going to be very important for us. We are going to be selling to the federal government, and we're going to be selling to people that sell to the federal government. And so we're looking forward to going through that process and getting that back.
There are parts of the federal government, Jake, that will not use cloud deployed software, period. They absolutely want an on-prem solution. Serval has an on-prem solution. It's just not widely publicized. Can you tell us a little bit about the on-prem solution?
Yeah, we from day one built Serval so that it could be hosted, self-hosted or on-prem. It was very important for us. We knew that these customers existed, not just in the federal government, but other large regulated industries are not going to allow certain pieces of data to leave their environment. They want to make sure that everything is maintained and hosted within their environment, and sensitive credentials and data never leave, no matter how good we are as a cloud company, no matter how robust our compliance and security controls are. Some companies are just never going to trust that kind of data to leave their environment. We say, great. We want to empower them to self-host our platform, make it very easy for them to do so. And so that's something we built in the platform from day one. This is another learning from our experience that this was going to be required. And it's very hard to bolt on self-hosting after the fact. And so we always knew this was coming. In fact, our very first customer was self-hosted. And that really builds a lot of expertise in the team. And then again, coming from Verkada, where we're building software for embedded devices, there's a lot of shared learnings when you're building software in that way and knowing that you're building things that get deployed to a fleet of devices that you don't have direct control or visibility into. A lot of those learnings translate to building and deploying self-hosted software.
That's amazing that you started out with an on-prem solution. So Thinking about LLMs and the way that they work, does the cognition happen on-prem or is the cognition sent elsewhere to the LLM provider in the cloud in order to accomplish whatever it is that the person is looking to accomplish via your API integration and your workflow creation? Does that happen inside of the enterprise on-prem if it's an on-prem deployment, or does that part happen still inside the cloud?
It's actually up to the customer. So the customer can bring their own keys for cloud-based AI models, or they can use their own AI models or self-hosted open source AI models. We really leave it up to the customer if they're doing the self-hosted deployment to configure this the way they want.
Okay, now that sounds to me, Jake, like a hybrid model, right? Like it sounds like the cognition is happening in the cloud and the action is happening on-prem, but I'm probably just not understanding it right. Can you disambiguate it a little bit for me, please?
Yep, there's a couple different models we have. So one is full self-hosted. Within the self-hosted model, you can determine whether or not you're using cloud-based solutions within that. So you can host the software fully self-hosted, but still have these integrations that are cloud-based. And so those integrations may include connections to AI models from OpenAI, Anthropic, and other similar tools that are cloud-based. So even though it is hosted within your environment, the software is hosted, you can still make API calls to external sources. That would be one model. You could also have a model where it's fully self-hosted in your environment, but you are only using AI models that are also in your environment that are not going out to other platforms that are hosted in a different cloud. That's another way of doing a full self-hosted model. We also have actually a separate concept of hybrid self-hosting where the workers, what we call the workers, are hosted in your environment, but then the overall SaaS platform is still hosted in the cloud. So you get a lot of the benefits of having a cloud-hosted application that you're not having to manage, but then the actual execution of workflows happens in your environment. And the reason why that is very valuable because the execution of workflows is what requires the decryption and use of your application integration credentials. So when you connect to sensitive tools like GitHub or AWS or your IDP, and you need those integration credentials, that can happen entirely in your own environment, and all the workflow execution happens in your own environment, but you still get all the benefits of a SaaS hosted solution apart from that. And that's what we call our hybrid model. And then we have a full cloud hosted model, which is also very robust and secure, not to take anything against that, but that's what most customers use. But we have all these different configurations, and what we'd like to be is just deployment agnostic. We know different organizations are going to make different choices, and what's cool is you can do this on a team by team basis. So different teams can be deployed in different ways: fully self-hosted, hybrid self-hosted, fully SaaS, cloud hosted. That's all up to the customer on how they want to structure things.
So Jake, also from a compliance perspective, there are some companies, and I won't name which ones, but they sometimes transfer some of the compliance obligations to their customers. And I'm thinking very specifically about credential rotation or key rotation, or especially token rotation for APIs. Sometimes those don't auto expire. Is that something that Serval can just take care of?
Yeah, absolutely. So because Serval can take any action in any application, as long as those applications expose the capability in their API, Serval can do that. So a lot of these applications, most of them have APIs that manage these tokens in some way. Serval can actually take action against those APIs. And the entire Serval API, the Serval platform itself, is exposed internally. And what I mean by that is the Serval workflows can take action against any piece of the Serval system, which is a really, really cool capability of the platform, meaning that Serval can operate on itself. You can build a workflow in Serval that takes any action in the Serval platform itself if you are authorized to do so. And so you can do these really interesting, you can build your own custom features in Serval using our workflow engine, including a lot of these compliance obligations, but also reporting obligations. So you could say, hey, give me a report of all these access requests and send it to me in a CSV. And that could just be built in Serval as a workflow. Or take all these tickets, take all these offline devices, notify me of this, look at this evidence, collect this data. Anything you can describe in natural language, as long as the code and API could support it, Serval will build it for you automatically.
So think about this for a second. This is like the CISO killer app here. I take my audit findings for these enterprise applications that have security holes, and I just feed them into Serval and just be like, you have the access, you have API access, fix it. Is that something it can do?
it can help you build a workflow to fix it. Yeah. And
Okay.
so what we think is really important, and it's kind of this division of labor that we think about in the platform, is that Serval builds the automation, and then that automation gets published, and then it can run with the permissions and approvals that you have in place. What we don't have in Serval, and this is by design, is a way for Serval to just naturally go into your business systems and do things, because we think that that's very dangerous. We want to have kind of a air gap between building the automation and running the automation. And that's because otherwise you can imagine an interface where you're chatting with Serval and you're saying, hey, could you delete all my Okta users? And it says, sure, I'll go ahead and do right that. No, instead, you could say, hey, I want an automation that deletes all the Okta users. Maybe you have an approval procedure around publishing that. You have permissions around who can run that. And so we try to have a separation between building the automations that can do things in your business systems and running them, and having, literally an air gap between those capabilities, so that there's not this capability where you just like have godlike access to all your business systems. And it's funny, we actually built a shortcut that could kind of make this a little bit easier, because we thought it'd be valuable for customers, describing just like what you're saying, where they wanted to do something that they didn't have an automation for. And we built this internally to try it out, and we turned it off because it was too powerful and too scary. Because somebody could come in and they could say, delete our entire organization in AWS. And the AI agent says, I don't have a workflow for that. But then we built a shortcut where an automation agent says, but I've drafted the workflow, click approve to go ahead and run it. And we realized, wow, we are one click away from somebody doing something devastating to the company. Let's not make that possible. And so we have intentional security decisions in our product where we've made things a little bit harder in order to make them more secure.
That's a perfect way to transition into a well-worn line of delineation for SaaS companies of security of the cloud and security in the cloud. Now, the way that I used to describe this to my customer is that security of the cloud is us, the SaaS provider, along with the CSP, or the cloud service provider. So in this case would be AWS. We will make sure that the cloud itself, that the platform itself is secure. We will also give you tooling so you can provide your people security in the cloud in order to accomplish what they are looking to accomplish on behalf of the enterprise. It sounds like you have done that. It sounds like you pushed it a little too far and then you brought it back.
Internally, we never released the dangerous stuff. Yep.
That's good. That's the way to do it. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ideas that your customers have mentioned to you about security in the cloud as it relates to whether or not their people will be able to use Serval for what they're looking to accomplish without having too much power inside of the organization?
There is a huge trade-off between how convenient and easy it is to set up Serval to automate very powerful things in your organization and how secure the platform is. So there is one version of this where Serval basically acts as almost like an MCP into all your business systems, and you ask Serval to do anything and Serval can just do it. We have the capabilities to turn that on today. We could do that if we wanted to, and we could release that. We think that that's a very bad idea. And so we've decided on this approach where we are separating the automation agent from the help desk user-facing agent. You can build automations that are tools, and those go through an approval process and have permissions and everything. And then you can have a help desk interaction that routes people's requests to the appropriate tool, separating those things out. Some customers have said, hey, it'd be really cool. I asked it to do this thing. It'd be really cool if it could do it. And we have to come back to them and say, well, it can't do it because it doesn't have an automation that can support it. And that creates some friction sometimes. A great example here is somebody says, hey, I want an undo button in Serval. I go and I create a Google group and I want to say, ooh, undo that. And that makes a lot of sense to us. That would be a really cool feature. But what that means is then we have to be able to have a capability to delete Google groups. And we might not necessarily want the system to be able to delete a Google group if you haven't given it that capability. So we think about those trade-offs a lot of like, yes, we want to undo the creation of a Google group, but that means giving the system automatic access to delete groups in your environment, which is pretty scary that your system might just have that and you not know that that's possible.
I'm super glad you're paying attention to that. I think everybody is, right? I mean, AI is so incredibly powerful, and it's not enough for a CISO to go to a CTO or a CEO and basically say, AI is too overpowered. We can't afford to deploy it internally, because the response to that is either do it or we will find a new chief information security officer. And so that's really something that I think my cohort of colleagues deal with every day, is like, what is the balance between enablement and enabling too much to where like you are actually creating the problem? And it sounds like you guys have created the safeguards necessary in order to deploy it responsibly.
That's our goal. Make it easy for you to build the tools that you have complete visibility into and control over. Make that very easy, and then make it very easy to route people to the appropriate tools, but don't build a system where somebody that's very well-meaning and well-intentioned could build something very dangerous. And we think about this principle of make it secure by default, make it so that people's ordinary usage of the platform does not generate inordinate security risk. And I think we have to think about that very much from a product design. We can do a lot from application security and all these things, but a lot of this comes down to product design and the UX decisions we make that make it unlikely that someone could do something very dangerous. And we think about that every day as we build out the platform of how do we trade off between, hey, this could be fun and useful, but that would introduce this ability for somebody to do something unintentionally dangerous to the organization.
That's an awesome point. I think what I'd like to clarify here is that Serval can be human in the loop.
Yes.
But doesn't have to be. And probably it's not a bad idea for Serval to be human in the loop initially. And then once the mechanism is proven and once the motion has been approved from a compliance perspective, then you can back the human out of the loop and just start automating.
Yeah, absolutely. And in practice, a lot of times what this starts at is customers implement Serval in silent mode. So Serval is silent, requests come in, and Serval generates the tickets, but it doesn't act on them. Security or IT in the background can go into the ticketing system and say, hey, Serval, resolve this. And Serval can attempt to resolve it in the background and say, I'm going to run this workflow. Do you want that to proceed? And everything happens only when the admin asks it to. It doesn't trigger automatically. So that's a good starting point. So you have visibility and control. And then eventually you say, hey, I want it to be in active mode where it's just going to route to these workflows automatically. But then even when you turn that on, you might have an approval step of, okay, before it resets that password, before it gives somebody access, it's going to get approval. And you might always want an approval step in there. But what we found is a lot of these human in the loop approval steps end up being just a rubber stamp. People just get the approval. A lot of times they're a manager and it's their direct report that needs approval. They want them to get the work done. So they're not really reviewing this from a security perspective. They're just getting the approval and rubber stamping it. And so you've delayed the provisioning without adding any actual security controls because everyone's just approving. And so one of the things we built recently that's really powerful is an approval workflow, which can actually do really clever, sophisticated things on how approval works. So that approval workflow could say, let me search for similar people in the organization, maybe peers, see if they have access to these tools. If they don't, then escalate this to this person for approval, otherwise automatically grant approval. Or maybe send that information to an AI agent to actually analyze with some business policy documents and other context, whether or not to proceed with approval or whether or not to escalate for additional approval steps. And so I think there's something very valuable here on shrinking how many things need approval so that things that are just going to be rubber stamped, you're not getting in the way of if they're low risk and it's some tool that everyone at the company already has. And things that actually do get escalated for approval are serious things that need review, because otherwise it's like a boy who cried wolf situation. If you're getting 20 approvals a day, you're not going to review every single one of them seriously. But if we shrink that down and we say like, hey, you're only going to get an approval request if we actually need you to review it, it actually improves security of the organization while also speeding everyone up and speeding up provisioning to these tools.
Now, that's really interesting because depending upon the granularity by which it's doing the analysis, you are moving from role-based access control to attribute-based access control inside of Serval itself, not just relying upon the API, which is amazing. That's what a fantastic self-graduating evolution of the product. It's more science fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's attribute-based access control, but it's also AI reasoning based access control. It's intelligence based access control. It's
Ooh, that might be a new thing.
be a new thing of let's look
Intelligence-based
at this
access control. I
person's
like it.
role, their history, all this data we have about this person, and use that to make an access decision instead of necessarily hard-coded rules that may or may not be relevant from a security perspective.
Did you hear that? That's another $1 billion being added to your valuation. Intelligence-based access control. Okay, great. Serval is absolutely punching above its weight. You've got some incredible customers. How is it that a company that's been around for less than 2 years at the time of this recording can address the needs of an enterprise that may be decades old with tens of thousands of employees, that has a supply chain that is global and a demand chain that is immediate and worth billions of dollars?
I think a big part is that we decided to go in that direction from day one. We knew that that is the market. If you look at ServiceNow, the vast majority of their revenue comes from customers with 7, 8-figure contract sizes. And so this is a market that's very much dominated by large enterprise buyers. And so you have to build a product that meets their needs. In the very beginning, if you think about how a lot of startups start, they start selling to SMBs and then they grow into selling to mid-market. And then eventually they hope to bridge the gap in enterprise. A lot of them never make it. And they do it by building often a product that is differentiated based on ease of use, simplicity of features, ease of adoption, all these things that make a lot of sense for SMB and mid-market buyers. Now, we knew that SMB and mid-market was not our target. And so that differentiation was not going to matter for us. People don't buy ServiceNow because it's got a great UI UX and because it's really pretty, because it's easy to use. They buy it because it's powerful, because it does all these things, because you can customize it and configure it and build everything you want it to do and map that application to your business, not the other way around. And so we knew that's what we had to go. So we went after the strengths of the large enterprise software providers that really allow you to configure and customize a system to meet your business needs. So we built a very flexible workflow engine, a flexible asset management system that lets you populate arbitrary fields and build a custom schema for your different devices and import that data from different tools. So we went after the hard problems of enterprise customization configurability. We didn't settle for just building a nicer looking product. Now, we do have a nicer looking product, but that's not why how we tried to differentiate. We differentiated on the core capabilities that matter to large enterprises.
Jake, that's awesome. But as a follow-up to that, you already have a Fortune 100 customer, one of what is likely to be a great many. How did you convince them that Serval was ready to take on a Fortune 100 enterprise and make good all the promises that are in the Serval literature?
My line with customers is, don't trust us, try us. Don't trust that what I'm saying is correct. Just get started on a pilot and then you'll be convinced. And so all it took was that customer and other Fortune 100s that we're working with today to actually get started, get their account set up on the platform and see what it could do and how we could tackle the long tail and automate really complex enterprise use cases. And then the product does the talking. I don't have to convince them. The product convinces them.
So Jake, $1 billion valuation in less than 24 months. That's amazing to attract new talent. I think that more important than the number are the names behind the number that said the number was correct. Can you talk a little bit about some of the investors that said $1 billion makes sense?
Absolutely. So as you said, the investors, the names matter a lot more than the number. There are a lot of less sophisticated investors, less discerning investors that do less diligence, that could give bigger numbers. But what really matters is who you're bringing on board and the quality and caliber of the people that you're involving yourself with. Our most recent round was led by Sequoia Capital, a legend among VCs, obviously the top VC in Silicon Valley and the name behind some of the greatest success stories in technology, including their very successful investment in ServiceNow 16 years ago. And so we're so lucky to have Sequoia on board. They've been phenomenal partners. And what's so valuable about Sequoia is the diligence that they do And the signal that that ends up sending, not just to candidates, but to customers that we work with, that Sequoia they're not an index fund. They don't spread their cash around to a lot of different companies like some VCs do. They pick one winner in each category and they throw their resources behind one winner. And in order to be able to do that and do that with confidence, they do more diligence than anyone else. They talk to every single customer we have. Not a few customers, not a couple customer interviews. They didn't read a couple briefing reports. They talk to every single customer we have. They also talk to the customers our competitors have. They talk to customers who chose competitors over us because they want to understand. They talk to our employees. They talk to people that I worked for at previous jobs, all of them, every manager I've ever had. They talk to people that worked for me, every direct report I've ever had. They talk to peers. They found ground truth of who are these people? What are they building? What do customers have to say about it? And then my pitch doesn't even matter because I don't get to frame a story for Sequoia around, hey, this is our company. These are the things you should pay attention to. That doesn't matter because they already know the truth because they talk to the people that matter. They talk to the employees. They talk to the customers. They know everything about us. They have a CRM where they track all the different people in tech and where they go and where they end up. So I think it's a really great signal to candidates, to customers that a fund like Sequoia has invested. And Sequoia is not the only one. We have incredible investors across our cap table. So Sequoia led our Series B, Redpoint has a similar approach, led our Series A, first round, General Catalyst, and the list goes on and on. We've been lucky to surround ourselves with some of the greatest investors, and they've been such a helpful advantage to us. Obviously, from a capital perspective, we have a lot of money in the bank to go after this market, but also from a leadership perspective, mentorship perspective, it's been really valuable to have them around the table.
I feel like you tore a page out of the Sequoia due diligence book when you think about hiring individuals here at Serval. The first thing you ask for is a list of references, and you call them. You call them. Like, I've seen the internal document where it says Jake is going to call this person that is the direct report of this candidate, or like going to call the person that this person reported into. And I'm assuming that you're triangulating some of the metrics on the resume and that sort of thing. And without doing too much assumption, just going off of the quality of the individuals that I have personally met inside of Serval, man, I got to tell you, you're doing a great job. You're picking winners just like Sequoia does.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I think the only durable competitive advantage in this environment is talent. You know, we can have a great product, but guess what? Other people can build a great product. We've got great AI tools that help make that product development process faster. We can have great insights about the market, but guess what? Our competitors are going to talk to the same customers and get those insights eventually and maybe copy us if they don't. And so the only durable way to stay ahead is to just have a better team, and a smarter team, a harder working team, a kinder team, just a better team overall. And so I think what's been really important is to build that team and then keep raising the bar on what it means to join this team. And references are a big part of our process. I think a lot of people do references as kind of this box checking exercise at the end of the process, like make sure there's nothing crazy about this person. I think about references as maybe 60, 70% of the evaluation of somebody. And the reason being is no matter how much time you spend with somebody during an interview process, you're going to be spending hours with this person.
Sure.
Where there are people that have spent years with this person. And I am just going to trust the people that have spent years with somebody versus what I was able to gather in a few hours with them.
That's fair.
And hours is optimistic. In a lot of cases, you know, my interview is going to be 30 minutes, 1 hour. Assuming on the high end, we've done maybe a couple dinners, it's still going to be hours. Mm-hmm. And I would rather talk to people that have spent years with a candidate. And that's how you get really deep insights. And I think if you ask the right questions in the right ways, everyone assumes that references lie. They don't lie. They tell you really honest things about this person. And if you ask the right questions, you can get a lot of information. And it's true that very few references will say, oh, this person's terrible or anything like that. But I think you can distinguish between this person is the greatest person I've ever worked with and this person's really good.
Here's why I know that talent is super important to Serval, is that in the short amount of time that I have been floating around the office, I have seen two very focused, very concentrated events around finding the best people. The first one was a lunch where you guys did like a pizza party where everybody was like, okay, go on LinkedIn and find the smartest people you've ever worked with and then send them an in-mail or a LinkedIn message and say, you should come work at Serval with me because it's the best place ever. And they did it. And then boom, you've got 10 new people working here. Last night, you went over to Sequoia, which ran you through their due diligence process to go do a joint recruiting mission with some of the best people they know. So when you say that you have an inordinate amount of focus on the people in your organization, I have to believe it's true just on those 2 proof points alone. I've never even heard of those things happen before.
Absolutely. And we have a pretty unique approach to talent too, whereas I think a lot of people look at this through a funnel of I got to reach out to 1,000 people and then 50 reply to my message and then eventually like I end up with somebody. We take this opposite approach where it's a person first recruiting motion. We have a Slack channel internally called Dream Team Draft, where people just post the best people they've ever worked with. I don't care if they're looking for a job. I don't care where they're at, where they're living. And we find those people and we think about how do we get them here? I want to start with the people that we want to bring in and find a way to get the best people in the world here, not just kind of cast a wide net and see what gets through our funnel.
That's a brilliant way to do it. I love that idea.
I mean, how do sports teams do it? Sports teams don't hold open tryouts and see who makes it through their tryout.
For sure.
They look for the best athletes in the country and they find those people and they try to convince them to come to their organization.
Are you scouting computer science classes in 8th grades? And
I think we might start. Yeah, I think there might be a world where we start looking at like math competition results and other competitions and we actually get in front of them. And I do like the football coach visit to the family's house and have dinner with them and give them like an offer letter when they're a junior in high school.
Yeah, and like, just bring a brand new Escalade with a big bow on it and stuff. I mean, that's the way it's done.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard even that there's some engineers that are hiring agents to negotiate their contracts. So I do think that software engineering is going to increasingly look like professional sports.
You know what? You might be right. So Jake, you and I are going to go have dinner in New York at the Harvard Club. And then we're going to have dinner at the Stanford Faculty Club in Palo Alto. We're going to be talking with a bunch of chief information security officers. And I think we're going to have some cool guests there. We'll keep them secret for now. But I think what I'd like to end on today is the idea that Serval is not new security spend. Serval is just doubling down on all of the security decisions that you've already made, the security tools that you've already purchased, just as an orchestration layer via natural language from a prompt, as opposed to hiring a slew of engineers or administrators in order to get that done. It's just doubling down on yourself for the tools that you already purchased. Is that about right, Jake?
That is exactly right. And I cannot wait to do these dinners with you and meet all these great CISOs.